I was born in England in the year 1632, in a comfortable home where I never lacked anything. My father was a German businessman who had settled in England, having left his homeland in search of better opportunities. With diligence and determination, he established himself in trade, becoming well respected among his peers for his keen business acumen and ability to navigate the ever-changing landscape of commerce. His ventures proved highly successful, and, over the years, he amassed considerable wealth, ensuring that our family wanted for nothing. My mother, a kind and gentle Englishwoman, was the heart of our household. She possessed a warmth that made our home a place of love and security, and she devoted herself to the well-being of her children. She taught us the virtues of patience, kindness, and humility, instilling in us a deep sense of gratitude for the blessings we enjoyed. Although she was not directly involved in my father's business dealings, she played an integral role in supporting him, managing our household with efficiency and grace, and ensuring that we were always provided for. I was not an only child. I had 2 brothers and 1 sister, and together we formed a happy and lively household. My brothers, both older than me, were strong-willed and ambitious, eager to follow in our father's footsteps and make their own mark in the world of trade. They learned the intricacies of commerce from a young age, often accompanying my father on his business trips to observe and absorb the skills necessary for success. My sister, the youngest of us all, was a bright and cheerful presence in our lives, her laughter filling the halls of our home with joy. We lived in a spacious and well-appointed house in a prosperous part of the city. Our home was adorned with fine furniture, and our table was always laden with delicious food. Servants tended to our needs, and we wanted for nothing. Despite the comfort and privilege that surrounded us, my father was not a man who encouraged idleness. He believed in the value of education and discipline, and he ensured that I received the best schooling available. My days were filled with studies in literature, mathematics, history, and navigation, as my father hoped that I would one day take up a respectable profession, perhaps in law or commerce. Yet, despite the abundance of my life, I harbored a dream that was vastly different from my father's wishes. From a young age, I found myself drawn to the allure of the sea. I would listen with rapt attention to the stories of sailors and merchants who had traveled to distant lands, their tales of adventure and discovery igniting a fire within me. I longed to embark on my own journeys, to see the vast oceans, to set foot on lands unknown, and to experience the thrill of exploration. This desire, however, was at odds with my father's vision for my future. He wished for me to take a stable path, to follow in his footsteps and build a prosperous life on solid ground. He saw the sea as a dangerous and unpredictable place, filled with peril and uncertainty. He warned me repeatedly of the risks, of storms that could sink ships, of pirates that roamed the waters, and of the countless sailors who had never returned from their voyages. He had worked hard to provide a secure future for me, and he could not understand why I would wish to throw it all away for a life fraught with danger and hardship. Despite my father's warnings, the call of the sea remained strong within me. It was not an easy conflict, for I loved my family dearly and respected my father's wisdom. Yet, deep inside, I knew that I would never be truly happy unless I followed my dream. This internal struggle consumed my thoughts as I grew older, and I spent many days torn between duty and desire, unsure of what path to take. As I approached adulthood, this conflict only intensified, and it was clear that a decision would have to be made, one that would change the course of my life forever. From a young age, I was provided with an excellent education. I was taught to read and write, to understand the ways of trade, and to conduct myself with proper manners. My father often spoke of my future, imagining that I would follow in his footsteps, become a successful businessman, and live a life of stability and prosperity. But despite my comfortable upbringing and the promising future laid out before me, I found myself drawn to a different path. I dreamt of the sea. The vast open waters called to me, filling my mind with visions of distant lands, mysterious peoples, and grand adventures. I longed to set sail, to see the world beyond the confines of England, to experience life beyond the safe walls of my home. But my father did not share my dream. He was a practical man, concerned with the risks and hardships of life at sea. He saw no reason for a well-bred young man like myself to throw away a secure future for the perils of the unknown. When I turned 18, my father called me into his study for a serious conversation. He sat in his large chair, looking at me with kind but stern eyes. "Why do you wish to travel by sea, my son?" he asked. I hesitated, searching for the right words, but my father continued before I could answer. "The sea is dangerous. It is not comfortable. You could die." His voice, usually calm and steady, trembled slightly. "A good life awaits you here. Do not throw it away." For a moment I was filled with doubt. My father's words carried weight, and I knew he spoke out of love. Traveling by sea was indeed dangerous. Ships were often lost in storms, men perished from disease, and pirates roamed the waters, preying upon the defenseless. But despite all these dangers, my heart still yearned for adventure. Unable to convince my father, I turned to my mother, hoping that she might support me. "Mother," I pleaded, "I want to see the world. Please, speak with father. Help him understand." But my mother, though loving and kind, shared my father's fears. She believed that my life in England was safe, and that the best future for me lay within the comforts of home. My heart ached, but I did not abandon my dream. A year later, I visited Hull, a bustling town in England. It was the 1st of September in the year 1651. There, I met an old friend whose father was a sea captain. His family often traveled by ship, journeying to distant lands. As we talked, he made me an offer that set my heart racing. "We're sailing to London. Come with us. See if life at sea is truly what you desire." My mind spun with excitement. I was not prepared for such a sudden journey, but the opportunity was too great to pass up. If I truly wished to be a sailor, this was my chance to see if I could endure the life I had long dreamed of. So, I joined them, stepping aboard a ship for the very first time. At first, it was exhilarating. The smell of salt in the air, the gentle rocking of the waves, the cries of seagulls soaring above. It was all new and wonderful. But soon, my joy turned to terror. A storm approached, dark clouds looming on the horizon. The wind howled through the sails, growing stronger by the minute. The sea churned, sending massive waves crashing against the ship, tossing us about like a toy. Fear gripped my heart. I thought of my home, of my warm bed, of my father's words. What had I done? By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sea eerily calm. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, and for a moment, it was as if the storm had been nothing more than a terrible dream. One of the sailors, a grizzled man with a knowing smile, approached me. "That storm frightened you, didn't it?" He chuckled. "That was nothing but a bit of wind. You'll see worse if you keep sailing." He offered me a drink, and soon I was drunk, the fear fading into the haze of ale. I laughed with the crew, forgetting my home, forgetting my worries. The next few days passed without trouble, but soon another storm came, this one even fiercer than the last. The ship was battered by the raging sea, and the men, usually so strong and fearless, prayed desperately for their lives. As I lay in my bed, trembling, I heard a cry of alarm. "There's a hole in the ship!" Water rushed in, and the crew scrambled to save us. I was frozen in terror, but a sailor grabbed me by the arm. "Get below deck and help. If we don't stop the water, we'll sink." I forced myself to move, helping to pump the water out as best I could. But despite our efforts, the ship was too damaged. A gunshot rang out. It was the captain's signal. The ship was lost. We had no choice but to abandon it. A smaller boat was sent from another ship nearby, and with great difficulty, we climbed aboard. 15 minutes later, our great ship disappeared beneath the waves. We had survived, but the experience had shaken me to my core. We reached land, where kind villagers helped us recover. I traveled to London by land, still determined to seek adventure despite my fears. There, I met a captain who spoke of wealth and opportunity in Africa. Intrigued, I agreed to join his voyage, eager to make my fortune. The journey was a success, and I returned to England with money in my pockets. I was emboldened, eager for more. But my next voyage proved disastrous. A pirate ship attacked us, and though we fought bravely, we were overwhelmed. Many of my crewmates were killed, and I was taken prisoner. Thus began the darkest period of my life. I was made a slave, forced to work for the pirate captain. My body ached from endless labor, my spirit crushed by captivity, but in the midst of my suffering, I met a young woman, also a slave. She was beautiful, kind, and though we did not speak the same language, we understood each other. She was my only solace in this wretched life, but I could not remain a slave forever. When the chance came, I seized it. Escaping on a small boat, I fled with a young boy who had also been captured. We sailed for days, terrified that the pirates would pursue us. Along the African coast, we fought off wild animals, foraged for food, and struggled to survive. After weeks of hardship, we encountered a European ship. The captain, seeing our dire state, took pity on us. He offered us passage, and I knew my journey was not yet over. Adventure had nearly cost me my life, yet still, I yearned for more. The sea had claimed me, and I would never turn back. They were also shocked when they saw that the animal was dead. Relief washed over them, but their joy was even greater when they realized that the girl was alive. Overcome with gratitude, they turned to us, their eyes filled with emotion, and thanked us profusely. In return for our help, they brought us more food and water, replenishing our supplies. We now had an abundance of provisions aboard our boat, ensuring that we would not have to stop for a long time. For the next 10 days, we sailed without interruption. The vast, endless ocean stretched before us, its waves carrying us forward as we gazed upon the horizon, wondering where our journey would take us next. On the morning of the 11th day, we spotted a cluster of islands in the distance. The sight of land filled me with hope, and I considered the possibility of stopping there to explore and rest. Just as I was about to suggest this to the boy, he suddenly let out a startled cry. His voice was sharp with fear, and I turned to see what had caused such a reaction. His trembling hand pointed toward the horizon, where a ship loomed in the distance. The boy's face had gone pale. "It's a pirate ship," he exclaimed, his voice barely above a whisper. I studied the ship carefully. The sails were large, and the vessel moved with a calculated grace across the water. My heart pounded as I prepared for the worst, but as the ship drew closer, I noticed the flag waving from its mast. It was not the dreaded Jolly Roger. Instead, it bore the emblem of Portugal. My fears eased, but we still needed to get their attention. Realizing that we had no way of signaling them, I grabbed a gun from our supplies and fired a shot into the air. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed across the waves. A moment passed, then another, before figures aboard the Portuguese ship turned toward us. Soon they had spotted our small vessel, and before long we were being pulled aboard their ship. Gee, sailors greeted us with curiosity and concern. They spoke Portuguese, Spanish, and French, but I could not understand them. Just as I began to despair of ever communicating with them, a Scottish sailor stepped forward. He spoke to me in English, and at last I was able to tell our story. Upon hearing what we had been through, the sailors' demeanor changed entirely. They became warm and hospitable, treating us as honored guests rather than desperate castaways. The captain of the ship, a kind and fair man, agreed to take the boy and me aboard until we reached a safe port. Overcome with gratitude, I offered some of our belongings in exchange for their kindness, but the captain refused. Instead, he insisted on paying for whatever he took. Moved by his generosity, I suggested that he purchase our boat for half its usual price, with the rest given freely. He agreed. The captain took a particular interest in the boy. He saw potential in him and suggested training him as a sailor. While I understood the opportunity this could provide, I was reluctant. The boy was still young, and I feared that a life at sea would take away the freedom he deserved. However, the boy was eager to learn, and his excitement could not be ignored. With a heavy heart, I watched as he embraced his new calling. The ship was bound for Brazil, and after 22 days, we arrived. I bid farewell to the boy and the sailors, stepping onto the shores of a land entirely new to me. Brazil was a young and growing colony, filled with opportunities for those willing to work for them. I did not know a soul there, but I was determined to build a life for myself. In time, I made friends among the local plantation owners, most of whom cultivated sugar. I quickly adapted, learning the language and customs of the land. With the money I had received from the captain, I bought a small piece of land and began producing sugar. The first 2 years were difficult, as my plantation yielded little, but my efforts paid off. Business flourished, and soon I found myself growing wealthier with each passing month. Life in Brazil was relatively free from strict government oversight. Taxes were low, and the society was still shaping itself. I enjoyed my independence, but after some time, I realized that my house was too large for one person to maintain alone. I needed help. One day I mentioned this to a friend who immediately offered a solution. "I have a daughter," he said. "She is 18 years old and an excellent cook. She could work for you if you wish." The next day, his daughter arrived at my home. She was shy at first, but there was a warmth about her that put me at ease. She was also beautiful, though I tried not to dwell on that fact. We spoke briefly, and she agreed to work for me. Twice a week, she came to clean my house, prepare meals, and care for my cat. Her presence brought unexpected joy to my life, and time passed. I found myself looking forward to her visits more and more. On days when she was unable to come, I felt an unfamiliar emptiness in my home. When she fell ill and did not visit for a week, I realized something profound. I missed her deeply. When she finally returned, a wave of happiness washed over me. Without thinking, I embraced her, and before I knew it, we shared a long kiss. 2 weeks later, I went to her father and asked for her hand in marriage. He hesitated, then gave his blessing. I was overjoyed. 2 months later, we were married, and my life felt complete. Together, we planned for our future, dreaming of a larger house and an even more prosperous plantation. One day, 3 of my friends came to me with a proposition. They were planning a journey to Africa for trade and wanted me to join them. The prospect of wealth was too great to ignore. After much deliberation, I agreed. We set sail on the 1st of September 1655 with a ship full of valuable goods. The journey started well, but after a week, a hurricane struck. The violent storm battered our ship, forcing us far off course. When the storm passed, we found ourselves near the Orinoco River, far from where we had intended to go. Before we could decide our next move, another hurricane struck. The second storm proved our undoing. Our ship ran aground, and we were forced into a smaller boat. The sea was relentless, and soon the waves overturned our vessel. I fought desperately to survive, struggling against the powerful currents. At last, a massive wave carried me toward a rocky shore. I crawled onto the beach, exhausted and barely alive. When I looked around, I saw no other survivors. My friends were gone. I was alone. My journey had led me to an uncharted island, where survival would be my only priority. With nothing but my wits and a few salvage supplies, I would have to forge a new existence in this unknown land. Determined to survive, I took stock of my surroundings. The island was lush and full of resources, but I knew I had to act quickly. I built a shelter from fallen branches and leaves, gathered coconuts and fresh water, and made a fire using flint from my pocket. As days turned to weeks, I explored my new home, mapping out its terrain. I discovered wild goats, edible fruits, and a small freshwater spring. Slowly, I learned to adapt, creating tools and weapons for hunting and protection. Though the loneliness weighed heavily on me, I clung to hope that one day I would find a way back to civilization. I noticed that some wild animals had eaten the fruit, but I still loved the Fruit Valley. The nature there was beautiful, and I wanted to live there. I even considered moving, but the beach was too far away. I needed to be close to the shore so I could spot a passing ship that might rescue me. Chapter 14. The House. Although I didn't move to the Fruit Valley, I decided to build another house there. I began visiting the valley more often, and step by step I constructed a small house with a double fence around it. The house was well protected, almost like a castle. Once again, I used a ladder to get in and out, but this time I also built stairs inside the fence. The ladder remained on the outside for additional security. This construction occupied me throughout August and into early September, but I enjoyed it. The Fruit Valley gave me so much energy. I felt strong and healthy there. At night, I would watch the moon and stars, thinking of my wife and family back in England. They could see the same sky, yet we were worlds apart. I often wished them well and imagined others across the globe who also gazed at the same stars. In those moments, I felt connected to the universe. I also thought about God, asking why I was stranded on this island. Why was I still alive when my friends had perished? I didn't have all the answers, but I trusted that God had a purpose for me. As the rainy season began and lasted until mid-October, I experienced my first full year on the island. When the rain stopped, I returned to my valley house to find that the fence was now covered in lush greenery. Not only was this beautiful, but it also provided excellent camouflage, making my house nearly invisible. Inspired, I decided to build a similar fence around my first house. When the rainy season ended, I planted my corn seeds. Worried about failure, I used only half of them. A wise decision because none of the first batch sprouted. I waited for the next rainy season to plant the remaining seeds, and this time, they grew. Now I had a small farm, and I realized that the island's seasons were different from those in England. There were no distinct spring, summer, autumn, or winter, only 2 dry and 2 rainy seasons. With this knowledge, I could plan my farming better. Chapter 15. The basket. As I explored the island, I realized I needed a basket to carry more food and supplies. I cut and dried branches from the same trees I used for my fences, weaving them into a sturdy basket. Once finished, I decided to take a longer journey around the island. I traveled through the valley where my second house stood and soon found expansive grassy fields dotted with colorful flowers. The air was filled with the scent of blossoms, and insects buzzed around. I saw large butterflies with wings spanning 10 centimeters. Surrounding the fields were small trees bearing nuts different from those in England. These were sweeter and had a unique shape. This side of the island was teeming with life. Parrots, rabbits, and even gray wildcats. I managed to catch a vibrant parrot with feathers in shades of red, green, purple, orange, blue, pink, and yellow. I also encountered many turtles and other birds. Though this part of the island was more abundant in food, I chose not to relocate. On my way back, my dog caught a young goat. I saved it, deciding to keep goats for food and milk. I left the goat in my valley home while I prepared a proper enclosure for it near my first house. Exhausted from my journey, I spent the next day resting before building a cage for my new parrot. I named him Pole and started training him to speak. I also created a map of the island, marking the newly discovered locations. Time passed quickly, and before I knew it, September had arrived again, marking my second year on the island. Unlike before, I no longer felt as sad. I had accepted my fate and found happiness in my daily routine. Hunting in the morning, cooking, at noon, resting in the afternoon when the sun was strongest, and working in the evening. November and December kept me busy protecting my growing cornfields. Wild goats and rabbits tried to eat the young plants, so I quickly built a fence around them and stationed my dog there at night. When the plants grew tall, birds became the next threat. I shot some to scare the rest away and stood guard until my crop was safe. Chapter 16. Bred by late December, I harvested my first batch of corn. Instead of eating it, I saved the seeds to plant again for a larger harvest. I realized I needed pots for storing seeds, so I searched the island for clay. My first attempts at pottery failed since I lacked proper knowledge. However, after 2 months of practice, I successfully made 2 large pots and continued improving my technique. One day, I noticed that a broken piece of pot in the fire had turned hard as stone. This gave me the idea to fire my pots to strengthen them. After testing the process, I was thrilled with the results. Next, I needed a way to grind corn into flour. Using a large hardwood block, I carved a hollow for grinding the seeds. To bake bread, I mixed flour with water and placed the dough between 2 heated stones. Though simple, it was my first taste of bread in years, and I savored every bite. Chapter 17. The canoe. By my 4th year on the island, my clothes had worn out. I crafted new garments from animal skins, including a cap, a jacket, and an umbrella. For sun and rain protection. Despite my isolation, I had everything I needed to survive. I wanted to explore the island by sea, so I decided to carve a canoe from a large tree. After days of work, I realized I had no way to move the massive canoe from the forest to the beach. Even digging a channel seemed impossible due to a hill in the way. I was devastated by my mistake, so much effort wasted. I vowed to plan my projects better in the future. Eventually, I built a smaller canoe that I could transport easily. On June 6th, during my 6th year, I set off to circumnavigate the island. The journey was perilous. I encountered strong sea currents that nearly carried me away. After 2 exhausting hours of paddling, I managed to return to the island, proving to myself that I was stronger than I thought. While exploring inland, I stumbled upon my valley home and decided to rest. I was awoken by a familiar voice calling my name. "Robinson, where are you?" Startled, I looked up and saw my parrot Pole perched on the fence, mimicking my own intonation. It was a strange but comforting moment to hear another voice, even if it was just my parrot. Though I longed for adventure, I didn't attempt another long trip for a year. Instead, I focused on improving my tools and pottery skills. Chapter 18. The footprint. 11 years had passed since my arrival. One day, while walking along the beach, I saw something shocking, a single human footprint in the sand. My heart pounded. I looked around but saw no one. Fear consumed me, and I ran back to my house, struggling to sleep that night. The next day, I convinced myself it might have been my own footprint, but when I returned to check, I saw that it was much larger than my foot. There was no denying it. Someone else had been here. Panic set in, and I began hiding all evidence of my activities on the island, reinforcing my defenses and securing my goats. 2 years passed without any further sightings. Then I discovered a horrifying scene. Human remains scattered across the beach, evidence of a cannibalistic ritual. I was furious and terrified. Should I attack them? I prepared for battle, but ultimately decided to only defend myself if necessary. As I neared my 23rd year on the island, I lived comfortably with my animals and parrots. But deep down, I longed for real human companionship. One day, as I walked to check on my fields, I wondered what fate had in store for me next. When the tide went out, I went to the beach. The sight before me was horrifying. Blood and bones scattered across the shore. Again, rage boiled inside me. I vowed to kill as many of the cannibals as I could the next time I saw them, but they didn't return for a long time. Then, one evening, after a violent storm, something unsettling happened. A gunshot echoed over the sea. I rushed outside and saw a light flickering in the distance. A second shot followed. It had to be a ship in distress, signaling for help. Grabbing a bundle of dry wood, I ran to the beach and built a large fire. Soon after, another shot rang out. They must have seen my signal. I was certain I would speak to someone that night, but no one came. I kept the fire burning until midnight, waiting, watching. Yet, the shore remained empty. It was strange. Something didn't make sense. Maybe by morning, I would have answers. Chapter: Dawn to visitors at dawn, I saw it, a ship anchored far from the beach. But something was wrong. The ship looked abandoned. I had expected to see people, the ones who had fired the gun the night before. Desperate for human contact, I decided to take my canoe and investigate. As I neared the wreck, I saw that it was a Spanish vessel, completely destroyed. No signs of life. Then, movement. A dog appeared on deck, wagging its tail frantically. It was starving and dehydrated. I gave it bread and water, which it devoured eagerly. But the crew, where were they? The ship was eerily silent. I searched every corner, but there was no one. It was a mystery. There were, however, plenty of supplies. Crates of all sizes were scattered about, many of them filled with bottles of alcohol, too heavy to take back on my canoe. But I found something far more valuable: guns and gunpowder. I loaded as much as I could and returned to the island at sunset. Over the next few days, I made 5 trips to the wreck, salvaging everything useful. Among my spoils were shirts, gold, silver, and most importantly, gunpowder. Gold meant nothing to me here. Gunpowder, however, was survival. I also found a pair of shoes, something I desperately needed. After storing my new belongings safely in my cave, life returned to its routine. But my thoughts often drifted back to the ship's missing crew and the cannibals. Then, one night in March, I had a dream. In it, 2 canoes arrived on the beach, filled with cannibals. One of their prisoners escaped and ran toward my home. I saved him. He became my companion, helping me navigate the dangerous waters around the island. When I woke up, the dream lingered in my mind. Could it be a sign? If I had help, escaping the island might be possible. Perhaps if I could rescue a prisoner, my fate would change. Determined, I began watching the beach more closely. For 2 years, I waited. Then, one afternoon, my patience was rewarded. 5 canoes arrived, carrying more than 30 men. There were too many to attack. I had to wait for the right moment. Through my telescope, I saw them light a fire and begin a ritualistic dance. 2 men, bound and terrified, were brought before the flames. One was beaten and killed. The others painted their bodies with his blood. It was no mere performance. It was real, and it was horrific. The second prisoner stood to the side, waiting for his turn. Then, suddenly, he broke free. He ran, and he was heading straight for me. Chapter 22. Friday. I grabbed my guns and hid behind a tree. The prisoner sprinted past, unaware of my presence. 2 cannibals chased after him. The moment they were close enough, I struck. Leaping from my hiding place, I fired my gun. The first cannibal fell, dead before he hit the ground. The second aimed an arrow at me. I shot him too. The prisoner stopped, startled by the gunfire. Fear flickered in his eyes. I smiled and gestured for him to come closer. Cautiously, he approached. Then suddenly, he dropped to his knees, pressed his forehead to the ground, and placed my foot on his head, a sign of deep gratitude and submission. I motioned for him to stand. He did, but his attention quickly turned to the bodies of his pursuers. Kneeling beside them, he examined the bullet wounds, his face filled with confusion. He had never seen such a weapon before. After retrieving arrows from the dead, we dragged their bodies into the forest and hid them. Then I led him to my cave, my secret sanctuary. There I gave him bread, meat, and water. Exhausted, he ate quickly and fell into a deep sleep. For the first time, I had a chance to truly look at him. He was young, around 25, with long black hair, dark skin, and a strong, lean frame. His face was pleasant, his features sharp. While he slept, I stood guard outside, watching for signs of the other cannibals. None came. 3 hours later, he emerged from the cave, his expression full of gratitude. I started speaking to him, teaching him simple words. I named him Friday, after the day I saved his life. He learned quickly. First, I taught him yes and no. Then, I moved on to greetings. Hi, hello, thank you. It wasn't easy, but I was patient. For the first time in years, I had someone to talk to. We spent our first night together in the cave. The next morning, I climbed to the top of a hill and scanned the beach with my telescope. The canoes were gone. We were alone on the island. Cautiously, we made our way to the shore. There, among the blood-stained sand, lay the remains of the cannibals' feast, human bones scattered across the ground. Friday began collecting the bones. Then, to my horror, he motioned as if he were about to eat them. I stopped him, furious. Only then did I realize Friday had been a cannibal too. I had to teach him otherwise. Together, we gathered the remains and built a massive fire. We burned every trace of the atrocity. Back at my house, I built Friday a small tent between the two fences for safety. At first, I took away his weapons. I wasn't sure I could trust him, but in time, I learned I didn't need to. Friday was honest, loyal, and good-hearted. He was like a child, eager to learn. And in many ways, I became like a father to him. Later, he would prove his devotion, willing to risk his life for me without hesitation. For the first time in years, I was no longer alone. And for that, I was grateful. If you like my stories, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can get new videos. Thanks for watching.